Welcome to our new year of In Search of Civility. I am Kelley Packer, and I'll be moderating today's discussion with my co-host, Kathy Griesmyer. Before we introduce our guests, let me share with you a bit of background on In Search of Civility. The series is an innovative partnership between the Association of Idaho Cities and the Boise Metro Chamber. We started this series in January of 2021 and remain committed to discussing the challenges facing our state and communities. In Search of Civility believes in the idea that truth exists and cannot be found without a sincere exchange of ideas. Civility in our discourse, we believe, is necessary for advancement and preservation of relationships, institutions, and society. To agree, one must first disagree well. Listening actively to key stakeholders, giving your political opponents respect, the benefit of the doubt, empathy, and sympathy for their motives. Ultimately, civility gives us the opportunity for our own ideas and notions to change, bringing improvements to our own lives and even society as a whole. We believe civil dialogue can affect great change, which is why we strive to help important conversations take place. These conversations are not possible, however, without the help of our partners and sponsors. We want to thank Holly Troxell Law Firm for sponsoring this show. We also want to thank our media partners, Idaho Ed News, the Idaho Statesman, the Idaho Press, and the Idaho Capital Sun. They provide us with a platform and audience with whom we can interact. Joining us today are three special guests. Kathy, can you tell us a little bit more about our guests today?
You bet. Thank you, Kelley, for that introduction. And I just want to welcome and thank our three special guests who are joining us today. We have Senators Janie Ward-Engelking and Lori Denhartog, as well as Representative Julie Yamamoto. And before we get started with our conversation, want to offer some background and introductions of our special guests. So first we have Senator Janie Ward-Engelking, who is proud to represent District 18 as its state senator. From serving as a classroom teacher, teen mom, and a community volunteer, Janie knows that children need access to quality teachers, rigorous curriculum, and a classroom setting that promotes learning. As a native Idahoan, Janie grew up on a small farm near Marsing with her four brothers. Her and her husband, Kay Engelking, raised 5 children in Idaho and are currently watching 9 wonderful grandchildren thrive in the area. She graduated from Valley View High School in Caldwell and attended Whittier College, received a Bachelor of Science degree from Idaho State University and a master's degree from Boise State. She is a 36-year resident of District 18 and a former classroom teacher of 33 years. In addition to her role as a state senator, educator, and mom, Janie is also involved in numerous civic organizations and is the recipient of many local awards, including Idaho's 2020 Mother of Achievement Award, Boise Metro Chamber Lifetime Champion, and the Idaho Education Association's Friend of Education Award. Welcome, Senator Ward-Engelking. Our next guest is Senator Lori Denhartog, who was elected in 2014 to the Idaho State Senate, where she represents the people of District 22 living in Kuna and Meridian. She serves as the vice chair of the Senate Transportation Committee and is also a member of both the Senate Education and Senate Resources and Environment Committee. She grew up on a dairy farm in rural Ada County and now lives with her husband, Scott, and their 3 children just a field away from that very same farm. Her and her family attend Cloverdale United Reformed Church in Boise, where they are active members, as her family and her faith are central to her life. She attended Nampa Christian schools from pre-K through 12th grade, and her 3 children now attend there as well. And after high school, she attended Dordt University in Sioux Center, Iowa, and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Business Administration and a minor in Public Administration. She has held positions in both public and private sector organizations in both land use and transportation planning, as well as grants administration. Welcome, Senator Denhartog. And our final guest today is Representative Julie Yamamoto.
We lost Kathy for a second, but I'm going to go ahead and finish that bio while we get her back online. Representative Julie Yamamoto is the daughter of Archie and Marlene Yamamoto and is the sister of 4 siblings. Julie was born and raised in Canyon County and appreciates the blessing of being a farm kid. Julie and her husband, Leland Sasaki, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, also a longtime educator, have been married for 28 years. Julie graduated from Valley View High School and then went on to earn a BA in elementary education and MA in educational leadership from the College of Idaho, and her educational specialist and Doctor of Education from the University of Idaho. Julie knew from an early age that she would be a teacher. She enjoyed teaching 7th grade and 1st grade before entering school administration. Julie's administrative career spanned elementary through high school. She was the planning principal and first principal at the New Caldwell High School and Valley View's Ridgeview High School. She also assisted with the building of Thomas Jefferson Charter School and served as the first administrator. She now serves on the TJCS board. In addition to her career in education, Julie has served on the West Valley Medical Center board for 9 years and was the board chair the last 4 years from 2010 through 2019. She's a founding member and current chair of the Assistants League of Boise Canyon County Branch. Julie volunteers as a facilitator for Love Inc. and attends Calvary Chapel Caldwell, where she volunteers as a greeter. With that, we're going to jump right in. It looks like Kathy's back. Yay. We want to welcome all 3 of our guests and are excited about today's show. We're going to talk a lot about education and this past legislative session. But we'd like to first start by recognizing, obviously, that all of you hold a very important elected position in the legislature. And we'd like to just hear from you what the reason was for you choosing to run for public office. Let's start with you, Senator Denhartog, and then Senator Ward-Engelking, and then we'll finish up with Representative Yamamoto.
Well, thank you so much. Well, kids are one of the primary reasons I ran for the legislature. You mentioned that I represent CUNA and Meridian, and we have so many young families, particularly in CUNA. I think at the last census, we had over 40% of our population in CUNA was age 18 and younger. And raising a family, we've got a kid in high school, middle school, and elementary. And so their families are going through the same things we are right now, trying to figure out what's best for them and navigate all the options and opportunities that are out there. And so that's a big part of the reason I decided to run for the legislature, which feels like a long time ago now.
Thank you. Senator Ward-Engelking.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And I ran after we had the Luna laws, they were Prop 1, 2, and 3 on the ballot. And it became apparent to me that there weren't enough educators in the legislature, that there needed to be a little more understanding that laptops and technology can be a wonderful tool, but it does not replace the highly skilled teacher in the classroom. And so that was my motivation to run. And I've always been involved in education and politics, because I knew that much of what happens in our classroom starts at the State House, and that's curriculum, funding, class size, all sorts of things. So my motivation was just to add an education voice to the legislative body.
Thank you. Representative Yamamoto.
Thank you. I should update that bio. I've been married 31 years to Leland Sasaki, and so I'm a little bit, that's old, I guess.
Wonderful. No, that's great.
Yeah. My thought has always been you should always give back to your community. And I had always been involved in the Canyon County Republican Central Committee to try to make sure we elected good people into office. And once I retired, I was approached by the then senator and representative, and they just said, you don't have any excuses anymore. You need to come and join us. And it always looks easy from a different vantage point. And then you get there and you realize how challenging it can be. And I really appreciate what you're saying, though, about this idea that rather than impugn motives and decide somebody is anti this or that, we need to have the discussions. And you have 2 other people on this stream that they just model that all the time, that they want to hear what people have to say and they really listen, not trying to think about what they're going to say next. They listen. And I just feel like if we had more people like Senator Ward-Engelking and Senator Denhartog, maybe we wouldn't have quite as much so much contention, and we might get more things done in a really good way.
Great. Well, thank you to the three of you for that. And sorry to have lost internet access right as I was going through important introductions. And thank you to Kelley for stepping in and filling in for me. So as we've noted, you all just finished the 2023 legislative session, which wrapped, I think, just less than 2 weeks ago. And we know education is always one of those topics where a large chunk of the session is spent really discussing a number of educational issues, from the budget to education policy. And knowing that education is such a key topic for Idahoans across the state, and knowing that public education funding represents over 60% of the state budget, anywhere from, kindergarten up through higher education. And so as you are reflecting on both the importance of education and just coming off this past session, we're curious to know what you all saw from your vantage point as the major issues regarding education policy during the 2023 session. And maybe we'll start backwards this time. We'll have Representative Yamamoto start, and then we'll go to Senator Ward-Engelking and then to Senator Denhartog. So Representative, go for it.
Thank you. Well, I was really pleased about the infusing the money into the career ladder. And you can say you love teachers all you want, but sometimes it's good to show it too by making sure that those salaries get to a place where it's competitive with other jobs they could have, and that maybe they don't have to have 2 or 3 jobs even during the school year or during the summer to be able to make a living and raise their own families and stay here in Idaho. So I was very pleased about that. I know the launch program raised some eyebrows with some folks, but I really do think, again, it's not just a handout, it is a hand up. And as a principal of 28 years, one of the things that students said to me over and over again is, $8,000, $10,000, even $1,000 would have been more than what they could do. So this investment in our youth and for what constitutes in-demand careers, well, in Idaho, it's just about anything, but we can certainly look to healthcare and say that's an in-demand job. Our education, recruiting and retaining teachers has shown itself to be challenging and getting more so. So I feel like that those two things that we've done for education have they're huge, and shows, again, you can say that you value education, but sometimes you show it, and the way you show it is how you invest financially into students. And so keeping them here in Idaho, I think it's a good thing, and was one of our, I think that we should all feel pretty good about that.
And I would say I was thrilled with the financial gains that we were able to put into education, the $6,359 for teachers. That'll be ongoing. It was critical. We've had a tremendous trouble recruiting teachers to the profession, and I think this will be helpful. It doesn't solve the problem because we still are lagging behind our surrounding states. Another area that I thought was essential is that we invested about $95 million into classified staff, and those are our bus drivers, there are paraprofessionals and people that are actually essential in the schools. And the pay that we had previously been funding them at a level that was not competitive, even with basically McDonald's. So that will be helpful, I think. And we were able to pass a bill that will promote apprenticeships, education apprenticeships in the state. And that will be something that the State Board of Education moves forward on. And I hope that will be helpful in growing our own teachers here in Idaho, because we really, we had a shortage this year. And we had, at the beginning of the year, I think there was 125 positions that had to be filled without certified staff. So I'm excited about that. But, and the launch program is going to be wonderful. I think we also made some serious gains in career technical programs in the state. We've put in $50 million that will hopefully be, and some of it's one time, but it will be so that our local school districts can afford to implement some more career technical programs. But it's just, there's so many things that we've needed in education for a while, and we've known that. And to have finally this infusion of money into education, I was very worried and have been very concerned about being 51st in the nation in funding for per pupil funding. And so it's nice to move forward and move up out of the bottom. We're not where we need to be, but we've taken a good first step. So I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead, Senator Denhartog.
Thank you. Well, Representative Yamamoto and Senator Ward-Engelking covered a lot of the great successes that we had this year in education, and there were a lot of great successes. The increase in teacher pay, the increase in the pay for the classified staff are two really important things. I was able to be involved in the one-time funding that Senator Ward-Engelking was talking about for the CTE programs, and that is a really critically important piece, particularly for our rural communities. We know that here in the Treasure Valley, we have, the larger districts have more opportunities, to consolidate resources and offer more things for kids. And we're hoping this one-time infusion really will be able to get some programs up and running or restarted, frankly, in some of our rural communities, which I think is really important for opportunities for kids. I'll touch on some of the other victories that I think we have in education, and there were a lot this year. The property tax reform legislation had, and one of the ladies can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was almost $100 million going to schools to help pay down bonds, and that will provide some relief to property taxpayers. And I think that is a really important component. It's not something that came through the education committees, but certainly will have an impact for our local school districts. Some of the other things were related. I do a lot of policy work in school choice and in the charter school space, and we had another one-time infusion of $50 million to kick off a charter school revolving loan fund, which is an initial capital investment to help schools get up and running. We know we have, the state is growing, and we're going to have so many more students in charter schools. I think are going to be an important component of being able to provide enough seats and classroom space for kids and families as they're trying to figure out where to send their kids. So that was an important piece of legislation and investment that we made. Another one was a program that we got started during the pandemic, originally Strong Families, Strong Students, and now what we know is Empowering Parents, which is a small micro grant for families to be able to supplement their kids' education that had only been previously funded with federal dollars. And the governor came in with a proposal, and the legislature supported $30 million in state funding ongoing for that program. And I think that's a really important program. It's not just a throwaway thing. We know, again, we learned so much through the pandemic about what we can do and what types of resources kids need even outside the classroom. So tutoring, extracurricular activities, different things that can enhance their educational experience are things that those micro grants can help cover. So I was really thrilled to see that go on. And then there were some disappointments. I don't know if you want me to hold off on the disappointments or jump into that now, but I had some disappointments for things we weren't able to get accomplished. But
actually, I think that's a great segue, because we're going to talk a little bit about that next here. You all talked about wonderful things that were accomplished that you all got to help in, but there were disappointments. There were also some really contentious issues that you had to navigate this year. So I'd like to talk a little bit about both of those, some of the disappointments that Senator Denhartog mentioned, but also the contentious issues that you had to face and try to navigate through. And we'd like to hear what those were for each of you, as well as what maybe the tools you implemented to navigate those hard conversations, and maybe to even try to help maintain some civility and respect during those hard conversations. So let's start with you, Senator Ward-Engelking, and then we'll go to Representative Yamamoto, and then Senator Denhartog.
Thank you. I do appreciate. Wow. We're echoing, but I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about a few of the things that were left undone. One of them is Senator Denhartog talked about the $50 million for a revolving loan for charter schools, interest-free loan. And we weren't able to do that for our traditional public schools. And so that's something that we have to move forward on, I think, in the future. We had a plan, we had a bill to use the endowment money for facilities for traditional public schools, but it didn't make it out of committee. So we've got work to do there. But we know that we have $867 million in deferred maintenance on our traditional public schools. That's just to get them up to good, not state of the art, but good. So we've got work to do. And we know that trying to do it with bonds and levies just isn't possible anymore, especially in our rural communities. Property taxes are too high. And so that's something we need to do and work on, and something that I'll spend the interim working with fellow legislators to see what we can move forward. But probably there were a couple of very contentious issues. One of them is the voucher or educational savings accounts that were being promoted. And this would have allowed public funding for education to go to private / religious schools, because once you open it up to private schools, it then, what the Supreme Court said, you don't have to open it up, but once you open it up to private schools, you must also open it up to religious schools. And that is something that our Constitution says it's not something we should be doing. And so that's a door I want to keep closed, not only because of the constitutional issue, but because we currently are underfunding education, public education in Idaho, and we do not have the funds to start funding private and religious schools at this point, in my opinion. And it's certainly, and plus the accountability piece. How do you hold a private or religious school accountable? If we send out public funds, I think it's reasonable to have some accountability that goes with those funds. And so that was a very contentious issue. We saw numerous bills. And then, and probably I'll let my colleagues talk a little bit more about this, but the library, criminalizing librarians or putting bounties on libraries has been a very contentious issue. We all want our children to be safe. We want them to have access to appropriate materials, but some of those bills, in my opinion, went too far. Librarians, school librarians, public librarians work very hard to make sure that the materials in their library are appropriate for students. So that was a contentious bill. And we had a lot of bills come through that I think were positive as far as parental choice. But one of the issues I had with many of them was this civil action, cause of action in them. It's a private cause of action, which allows parents and patrons to sue. It's like a bounty system, and that was very problematic for me. I think it opens up our school districts and to being in a continual lawsuit mode, and that's very difficult for our local school districts. So those were some of the things that come to mind. Also, I really try very hard to maintain local control. I think those school board members are elected and they are close to the community. They know what's appropriate for their community. And I try to leave as much of the work in their hands as I can. So thank you.
Representative Yamamoto.
Well, the person who leads off usually does. We're among two other women who are just on top of everything, and so whoever leads off pretty well covers it. And so I'll kind of go more towards looking at process, and really appreciated the revolving loan fund that came up last year, and it made it on the House side and didn't make it through the Senate side. So good for Senator Denhartog to carry it through and get it through on both sides of it. And there's a real commitment on the part of people in House Ed. There were 4 of us who said that we will take up the charge to try to do the same thing for the traditional public schools, because we can see that even the Jason Monks, Representative Monks, who championed the tax bill, he said it's a start, but he knows it's not going to do it all. He realized that. He acknowledged that. And so there needs to be as many tools as we can. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take Representative Brent Crane up on his offer that when we talked about losing that March date for schools, one of the things I had been told over and over again is that before last year and years past when that's been talked about, that the schools would have been willing to lose that March date if we didn't have that supermajority to meet, that 66 2/3. And so when I mentioned that on the House floor during debate, he got up and he said that he would work with me to for legislation to do exactly that. Because as you know, with that tax bill, part of that was to not have that March date, which honestly wasn't well attended. And when it's less than 10% of your voters, I understand why people are feeling like that. It's not very representative of all those who then pay the taxes for it. I would also say that one of the things I hope that we start thinking about is that, people get to debate however they debate, but this idea that we always set things up as that you're either all for this or you're against it, like that you either believe in protecting children from pornography or you don't, or that you believe that parents should have a choice or you don't. These are it is a false dichotomy, and it's effective, but it's not, to me, the most honest way of approaching the debate. And when we're talking about having civil debate, let's get down to, there are pros and cons to everything. Well, let's be honest and let's talk about those things and let's lay them out, and then we get to decide what, in the House Ed, we had on behind our nameplates, it had our constitutional yardstick, and it said everything that we think about here, everything that comes before us, one of the things that we need to look at through the prism of what does that Constitution say about establishing and maintaining a thorough, public, free, and common schools. And so it ended up being kind of our yardstick for determining any bill that came before us, how does it line up to that? And there were huge disparities between even how people on the committee, even from that were all Republicans, how they saw that. And that's why you need 70 of us in the House, and that's why you need 35 senators, is because people don't see things the same. So to me, it's the process of things, is that can we get to this place where we're more collaborative in nature, that we trust each other a little bit more to be willing to lay things out honestly, openly, and put our cards more on the table. I know things have happened in the past that caused people not to want to do that, but truly, the best decisions are all made when really smart people get together, set aside their differences, set aside their maybe ego, maybe getting credit for something, and decide that we're really going to do what we think is best, and it's best for all Idahoans, not just a few. So that would be probably what I would say about more process than the contentious issues. I will say with the library issue, it will be back, and I'm hoping the fact that it comes back and that it went through several iterations to get where it finally ended up. And obviously, there's a little more that needs to be done, both with what Senator Ward-Engelking said, and just this idea that maybe there needed to be two bills, one that looks at school libraries and one that looks at public libraries. Because I see that there's a difference in how those need to be addressed.
Thank you. Senator Denhartog.
Yeah, there were a lot of contentious issues, and I think what's interesting is those are the things that kind of take up the headlines and feel like they take up the oxygen, in a room. But I think it's hard for people outside of the legislature or not following it closely to understand that even as those contentious issues are playing out, we are all still actively, working on all of the other things at the same time. So those positive things that we talked about being able to accomplish, which takes everyone, right? No single legislator can accomplish any of those things on their own. The contentious issues are playing out at the same time. And I think that gets lost in the mix. People are like, well, all you ever talked about was, this library bill, or all you ever talked about was, universal school choice. And it's like, no, there were so many other things happening at the same time. And then just in recognition of Senator Ward-Engelking leading off, some of my disappointments are maybe a victory for others. So, we recognize that too. So I was disappointed we weren't able to get some more school choice policies through the legislature. It's interesting, every other year we go through an election cycle and we didn't really know what we were coming up with. There were so many new legislators in both the House and the Senate. The committees were so different that we were trying to learn about each other. We were trying to learn about how people not only view an issue or how they come at solving a problem. And for those of us who've been there and really care about getting things across the finish line, you understand that if you lose one year, you work on it and you come back the next year. Both Senator Ward-Engelking and Representative Yamamoto mentioned issues that were like, okay, we heard this, we learned this, now we know this, we're going to bring these people around the table and we're going to come back again next year. I've had years and years of disappointments at not being able to reform our school funding formula, but we're going to keep working. Like you keep trying. There's things that you just keep attempting to do. So the other states have been able in the school choice realm. We've seen other states do some pretty significant, what I would consider advancements in school choice around universal school choice, which is providing public funding primarily now through an educational savings account that families can choose the educational pathway that's best for their kid. And we saw that expanded in several states this session. We weren't able to do that here in Idaho. We did propose something smaller and more scaled back. There were a lot of concerns and things that we heard on the Senate side, on the debate on the floor in particular, but even a scaled back version wasn't able to get across the finish line. So you stop, you regroup, you think, and you're like, okay, is it possible then, now that we kind of know the players and we know the two education committees, you think about your strategy for the next year, you think about how you could retool something, how you're listening to what people's concerns were. And sometimes you can address those concerns and sometimes you can't because you're just on different sides of an issue. And that's just a recognition of the process, but it doesn't mean you stop working with people on all the other issues that we're trying to get across the finish line. And you heard earlier, we got a lot of things across the finish line.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator Denhartog, and to our other two guests for your answers in that space, which I think kind of leads into my next question, which is more on a process standpoint, right? So even amongst you all here on our guests, there's a differing level of viewpoints on particular issues, and certainly you build that out amongst your remaining colleagues. 70 members in the House, 35 senators in the Senate, and then you have a number of education stakeholders who are very active throughout the legislative session. You have school boards and elected trustees, you have parents and students themselves who are engaged, you have teachers who are really involved, you have, State Department of Education, you have the universities, and then, general members of the public. And so in thinking about all of these stakeholders that reach out to you to provide input, entities that are coming to you with policy ideas or even problems that they're asking you to solve and to fix, I guess my follow-up question is, how do you engage that variety of viewpoints? How do you help assess the information that's being provided to you, and then use that through a civil form of discourse to really arrive at the best form of policy that serves students, right? You, Senator Ward-Engelking and Representative Yamamoto have talked about, your constitutional obligation to serve public schools and a free and fair public education. But that also helps meet a number of other stakeholders that are thoroughly invested in our education system. So kind of a heavy question, but ultimately kind of boils down to, how do you engage that variety of viewpoints and use that to inform how do you move the best policy forward? And so maybe I'll start with you, Representative Yamamoto. You're at the top of my screen, so I'll pick you first. Go for it.
Thank you. Well, one of the things I wanted to follow up, and this just is a perfect segue, Senator Denhartog and Representative Horman have been working on changing the school funding formula for many years. And what I was excited about is to hear State Superintendent Critchfield say that she was going to come alongside with them and work over this summer to work on what they are trying to put together. So instead of this contentious thing where we seem to be at odds or fighting against trying to keep the status quo, I think a lot of people have thought that funding formula was, it's just evolved over the years to be so, it's crazy. And so I really appreciate that they are looking at being forward thinking, and that we have a state superintendent who's willing to come alongside, and that she's going to work with them, that something is ready to come before us in January, because everybody probably thinks it's going to be probably a short session, given that it's going to be an election year. And so things need to be ready to roll when we get there. And I really also appreciate what she said about this idea that knowing who people are and how they look at things, and that it doesn't mean they're wrong, but you have to be willing to take a few steps to the right or the left of an issue and try to see it through their eyes, and try to view what are the issues, and then how do we come to common ground? What is it that it isn't so diluted that it's worthless, but that, I hear people say, well, this is a good bill because everybody hates something about it. Well, I don't know about that. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get to something that everybody says, well, maybe I didn't get everything I wanted, but it's good. It's going to get us started. It's moving us in the right direction. And I think that about school choice in particular, that I think there's room for us to go. It's just, how do we get there? And what was presented to us this time just wasn't, there was no give on the part of many in the House Ed. And part of that isn't just because that's how they feel. They were listening to their constituents. And I really appreciate that they were feeling like, people think you get bought off by this person giving you money or this organization giving you money. Those people on the House Ed, and I would say none of us really are looking at who's giving us money. They're looking at, how do I represent the people, the 55,000 approximately that are in my district? And I think we just have to keep going back to that, and recognizing that it's not always easy, but the best decisions are going to be made when we all sit down and listen to each other before it hits the floor and before it goes to either chamber. I'm just going to use one example, and that was that In God We Trust motto bill. At first, he kind of didn't want to make changes because he thought it was just fine the way it was. It went through about 4 iterations, actually got pulled back, reworked, and then and part of it was he listened to his dad. He called his dad and he said, "Hey, Dad, they're telling me this, this, and this." And he just said, my dad just said, "Well, I think you ought to listen to those people." And he changed the bill. Hey, If it takes your dad, yay, do what you got to do, but let's do good stuff that everybody can feel good about.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Senator Ward-Engelking next.
Thank you. And I think, to be real honest, we have work. Well, I should say, as a member of the minority, I am able to get bills through, but it takes working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I know how important that is. Those relationships are critical. And so, funding for kindergarten was a 9-year journey for me. And also this funding formula, I started working on that when I first came to the legislature, and we had interim committee after interim committee. One of the issues with that funding formula, and it's antiquated, it needs to be redone. It was put together and has been revived a few times, but in the 1990s. So it is antiquated. We need to step up and start funding on enrollment and not average daily attendance. The problem has always been is that when you change something, and in this case, the funding formula, you need some additional revenue to make it work for all districts. I mean, we want to start funding at-risk students or students that need some additional resources. We want to do enrollment versus average daily attendance. That in itself is about a $60 million bill or more. So, but it's time to address that. And I think having that $330 million set aside for education every year will be helpful in us being able to move forward on some of these issues like funding formula. That money we know is going to be there and it's going to be used for education. It might free up a little bit more of the discretionary money for districts. And so I'm hopeful that we can get something done on the funding formula that will work for all stakeholders. But I think it's really important as a legislator to listen not only to constituents, but to stakeholders, people that actually have to implement what we pass. And I try to look at the bills that I support. Not only is this good for my district, but is this good for all of Idahoans, all of Idaho? I try to look at it that way because even though I represent District 18, I know that the bills that are passed impact every single Idahoan. So I try to look at it at a little broader lens, but I do listen carefully, and I listen carefully to the people that I know are going to have to be in the trenches making this work. And I do try to keep local control in my mind when I'm passing or voting on bills. If we can push it down to that level, I prefer it because I think that government closest to the people probably understands better what works for their community. And so I'm very conscious of that. And I do want to say that we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and it's not just with the funding formula, it's with maintenance, deferred maintenance on our public traditional schools. But we also, I think, have to applaud ourselves for some of the really great things that we've done. We're ranked third in the nation in our choice. Parental choice, and we have done a tremendous amount as far as open enrollment and allowing students to do dual credits. And I mean, there's a list of things that we have allowed our students and our parents to pick and choose. I mean, you can do internships and you can do flexible scheduling, and there are career technical pathways you can choose. So we've done so much. And yes, there may be more that we can do, but I think we need to applaud ourselves that the United Heritage Foundation ranked Idaho third in the nation in choice for parents. So even though there may be more to do, we've done a lot of work in that area, and I think that we can continue to move forward. But I think we have to listen to stakeholders and also constituents, but we also have to look at how does this impact all of Idaho. So those are my thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And now Senator Denhartog, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it can be really hard to listen to everyone. Sometimes you hear conflicting things from, stakeholder groups, which could be, school board members or superintendents association versus parents, or, what you hear from the state superintendent. So it's always a balance. And maybe I'll provide an example as a way of how it works. So the open enrollment bill is a good example this year. We had an initial bill printed. We had been working with an organization who really valued that as a high priority for choice. And this is open enrollment between districts and within districts, which matters more for our larger school districts. And what we found here in Idaho is that we have a lot of great open enrollment policies already in existence, particularly in our large districts like West Ada and Boise, really robust open enrollment policies that were really working well for kids and families. And this was another law that had been on the books for 30 years and hadn't been updated. And really there was things that were being done that made sense, that were like, well, if we modify the law, that will make it easier for everyone. So one of the themes you're hearing today is how many times we reprint a bill or amend it, or, as we learn through the process, it's continual. It happens all the time. And this is part of that listening feedback. So we had an initial bill printed on open enrollment, and because we wanted it to be workable, not only for kids and families, but for the districts and the people who had to actually implement it, as Senator Ward-Engelking mentioned, then we had, I think, 3 or 4 or 5, I don't remember how many meetings with all the stakeholder groups around the table. And then they're going out and reaching out to the people in the field and saying, okay, this is what it might look like. What do you think? What do you know? How does this work? How can we make the law workable for you as you implement it? And that was an iteration and a process. And the final bill that came forward, everyone was able to agree to, because we had taken the time after that first printing to kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, like, what do you know? Which part are you involved in? What does that mean for, funding from the state level? What does this look like at the district? How do you communicate with families? Does it add an extra reporting burden for the school districts? That kind of thing. And that really, it's about it being a two-way street. And at the end of the day, it wasn't something that was, this group's idea or that group's idea. It became, everyone had ownership of it. And that was a really exciting one to be a part of as well. And not earth-shattering, because so many districts were doing it well already, but still important. And I think, there's things like that sometimes get lost in the mix. But we get excited as legislators when we see things like that come together.
Wonderful. You've all touched on a lot of different issues, varied issues that the legislature grappled with this year. Let's put a little bit finer point on it. And I want to ask each one of you if there was just one issue that kept you up at night. And if so, how did you work to resolve it for yourself, but also for the parents and students and all of Idaho, as Senator Ward-Engelking mentioned? And Senator Denhartog, I'm going to put you on the spot first. If you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for me, it was the expansion of school choice in the state. As I mentioned before, and Senator Ward-Engelking has talked about some of the great things that we've been able to do over many years of, frankly, trying and failing and trying again and finding some success and then expanding on it. So coming into the session, again, not knowing what the committee makeups were going to look like, what the individual folks, those of us who've been in for a little bit or who have worked with each other, we kind of have a good feel. We're like, oh, okay, I kind of think I know how this is going to work. I was so uncertain about how the trajectory of the session would go as it related to that discussion. I knew the things that particularly myself and Representative Corman had been working on for years that I thought, okay, I think, this is what we can potentially get across the finish line. And then you watch other things happen and you're like, oh, that got derailed. And you kind of don't know. And none of this, I say but you can't, none of this is by ourselves, but you're like, how do you pull that back? Or how do you respond to that or listen to that? And sometimes there are things and issues and debates that just kind of take over in a way that then you don't get to control the narrative. And Representative Yamamoto mentioned this early on, and that's not only inside the Capitol, but it's outside groups projecting on or interpreting, a yes or no vote to mean we are all this or all that, or totally for that or totally against that. And everything is so much more nuanced than that. At the end of the day, we get a yes or a no, so we have to decide, which is hard. And sometimes you take that yes or no vote knowing that you may be cast in a certain light that may not be true, really, if people don't take the time to listen to what you have said or, public statements that you've made or other votes that you've taken. And that can be really, really difficult and really frustrating. And I think in that space too, it's just important to know that even where we have differences of opinion, one of the things I've appreciated about serving on the Senate Education Committee is that regardless of how my colleagues on the committee vote, I know that everyone is trying to do what they believe is best for kids. We sometimes have very different ideas about what that looks like or how to get there. And we may have strong disagreements about the ways or, approaches we might take. But that was definitely an issue that kept me up at night. So, and we'll continue probably.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Yamamoto, how about your thoughts?
Yes, I'm glad that we waited a while before we had this time, because that library bill was extremely contentious, and first went through House and then ended up going through State Affairs and made it to the floor, and it's exactly what Senator Denhartog. Sorry, I'm a squirrel and I go there. Definitely what Senator Denhartog was talking about is that even people who do know you asking you, really, you want pornography in the hands of children? And even at the church I go to, I quit going there and told them I'll take a pause, because it was actually causing, I felt like a problem in the church, because this idea that somebody who is greeting, sometimes doing announcements, that she voted no on that library bill to keep pornography out of kids' hands. And I was asked, well, can't you say it in just a short little, just give me one or two sentences? And well, no, you can't. You need to be willing. People in this state have got to be willing to not just always listen for sound bites. We have got to start getting into that place where we are going to be more thoughtful and more involved in knowing what is it really we're talking about. And then let's be sure that, like I said to them over and over again, if you just looked at A and B in that bill, it is a no-brainer. Once you get to C, any other harmful materials, that's challenging. And then when you start looking at the processes and applying that to both public schools and public libraries, and this lack of local control and everything going to a private right of action, all those things they're part and parcel of that bill. And you don't get to just say, well, on the big thing, I'm going to go ahead and vote yes, when really the big thing is what does our Constitution say? What do we believe about local control? And what really is a parent? We codified parent rights this session, and part of me, I have to say, had a really hard time thinking, why are we codifying something that should be a given, that parents are parents? And even this idea that they're stakeholders, they're parents, and so there, even in that, you go back and forth. So to me, the sleeplessness was I felt I didn't lose sleep over my decision of what I was going to do. What I lost sleep about is how do you explain it in such a way that other thinking people are going to hear what you say and understand, you know what, uh, she's not going to hell. When I stand before the judgment seat, I don't think he's going to say, you voted no on 314 and therefore you don't get an entrance. I think he is going to say, in as much as possible, did you live at peace with all men and women? In as much as possible, did you love others like you love yourself? And that to me is at the end of the day, what you have to spend some time. And I'm not perfect at it. Believe me, I have had to really, that bill was challenging because people who I thought knew me really well, questioning my motives and questioning my faith. Wow, that was stunning.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. Senator Ward-Engelking.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have said it so well, but we get a yes or a no vote, and sometimes bills are very complicated and there's so many moving parts in them. And so at the end of the day, you try to assess, is this bill the best we can do? Is this going to move Idaho forward? Is this positive for students? Is it positive for parents? Is it positive for business? And I sit on the JFAC, which is the finance committee. And so I spend an incredible amount of time on budgets. 3 and 4 hours a day, plus lunch in the morning, plus lunch hours, plus evenings. And so I really try to make sure that we're spending the money in a way that's going to be beneficial to Idahoans, not only today, but in the future. And so that keeps me up at night. And especially when it comes to making sure that our students are going to have opportunities and that they'll be able to compete with students from other states. Universities, the budgets for the universities have been very difficult lately. And I just, those things keep me up. But I will say that the voucher / educational savings account bill was one that was very concerning to me. I know how much money we have to spend. I know how much we spend on education. I know that we are not spending at the same level as the surrounding states. And so to think that we can possibly siphon off some of that money and use it for private or religious schools, I just couldn't see it. I just couldn't see that we have that kind of financial ability at this point. And I do want to make sure that parents have options, and I think we've provided those. But it's hard sometimes because when the media is involved, there is just a soundbite. It's a 5-second thing, and people don't understand that we look at every piece of that bill and we try to make sure, is this workable? Does this work for Idaho, and does it work for us today and in the future? And so I know my colleagues wrestle with those things too. The library bill was very hard because nobody wants our students, our children exposed to pornography. That's not something that we want, and we fight diligently to make sure that doesn't happen. But the problem is parents have to have some responsibility too. And in that library bill, I mean, a parent has to sign for a child's library card. And when they sign for that, they can actually get an app that tracks what their child checks out. And librarians, they put the books in a children's section, a teen section, and adult section. And but I think parents have to take some responsibility to ensure that their children are reading what's appropriate and looking at what's appropriate. That's our job as parents. And my level of comfort might be different than somebody else's level of comfort when it comes to what their children read. But that's, that's something I should monitor. So there were a lot of bills that kept me up, but I will tell you that budgets kept me up at night, making sure that the federal money that we receive, that we're investing that in Idaho in a way that generations from now will benefit from that, because we know it's a one-time deal, and we want to make sure that we're doing water projects and road projects that will be beneficial and that our children will be able to appreciate in the future. So I would say budgets, and then the ESA, the Educational Savings Account, and the library bills were pretty rough. Also, the property tax bill. I wanted a cleaner, simpler bill, but it's what we had, so I supported it, even though there were some things in it that I know we'll probably have to come back and fix, because it offers good relief this first year, but a lot of that's one-time money, and we may have to go back and readjust. But it was some property tax relief, and our constituents were begging for that. So thank you.
Well, thank you, you all. And, we just appreciate your heartfelt response to that question, because I think it's so helpful for the public to understand. You all are sorting through hundreds of bills, multiple iterations, several votes in committee and on the floor each and every day. And so I think it's a good reminder for the public to know just how serious you all take this job. Not that there's a question in that sense, but also really the time and energy you spend analyzing and working to hear from people that are trusted advisors, stakeholders that are near and dear to your heart and the issues you care about, and weighing all of that for what's the best decision to move Idaho forward and ultimately to maintain an educational system that meets the diversity of needs for students and for parents' needs. So thank you for that. And hopefully with session having wrapped up, you have some time to get a little bit more restful sleep now that you're not wrestling with such contentious issues. Given that the hour of 1:00 has come, though, we'll probably start to wrap up. So I do want to tremendously thank our guests today, Senator Janie Ward-Engelking, Representative Julie Yamamoto, and Senator Lori Denhartog. We just appreciate you all for your time and being with us today, and for all of you out there in the internet world who joined us and watched online. I also want to thank the Association of Idaho Cities and the Boise Metro Chamber, along with our media partners at Idaho Ed News, the Idaho Statesman, Idaho Press, and Capital Sun. And also a big thank you to our incredible presenting partner, Holly Troxel Attorneys and Counselors. And I hope that you'll join us next month for our next In Search of Civility podcast, which will take place during the lunch hour on May 15th. And we're really excited about next month's discussion as well. So thank you again to our guests. Thank you also to Kelley for being a great co-host, and to all of our partners. We just thank you for your time and hope you have a wonderful rest of your Monday. Thanks.